We are less than 2 weeks away from Michigan taking the field for the first time in the 2024 season. Not to be confused with 2024, because obviously national championship has been won in this calendar year. Nonetheless, the defense is certainly what everyone looks at when it comes to the Wolverines. We're going to spend today discussing more nuance when it comes to the defense, just why it might be so dominant. We're going to get into what LaMar Morgan had to say on Sunday. I was going to say Saturday, Sunday, as well as some other little tidbits here and there on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. One of the interesting things I think when it comes to any given season is it never quite looks exactly like what you anticipate, right? There are years when, sometimes it does maybe. Like I think of 2016, for instance, and I thought the offense was going to be better than a lot of people thought. I knew the defense was going to be stellar. And it's exactly what we got, right? Michigan was clowning everybody until really you got to that Iowa game. The Wisconsin game in week 4 or 5, whatever that was, gave you a little pause, but it was a top 10 team. But that might be the only year where Michigan kind of looked as anticipated for the most part, and certainly could have gone different if Wilt and Spate didn't get injured in that Iowa game. But a lot of these other years, you look at it and you say, all right, we know what this is going to be, or we think we know what this is going to be, and it's going to ends up being a bit different. There ends up being different players that step up and so on and so forth. And I kind of am starting to get a little bit of the gist of that now. And even though we've kind of gone into this offseason understanding like there's going to be a lot of position battles. And I think that particularly since they added a lot of transfers post-spring, that gave us a different idea of what we would be looking at when it comes to the defensive backs. And yet, I feel like it's still catching some of us for a loop, right? Because even though Jair Hill has been a guy that has been mentioned a lot, even like Big Ten Media Days and all, even just kind of coming out of spring ball, is like he might be that guy. I think a lot of people, and we've talked about it on this show, so including myself, thought that maybe Amir Hall or maybe even Ricky Johnson would end up being that guy. But as far as what LaMar Morgan said with 2 weeks to go, that Jair Hill is the early leader on the opposite of Will Johnson at cornerback. I don't think that's necessarily a surprise. When you go to safety, where I'm maybe a little bit more surprised, because I don't know, maybe I was buying into some narrative, but that Quentin Johnson appears to be the guy. He didn't say this necessarily outright, but he definitely insinuated it, that Quentin Johnson and Makari Page are the likely starting pair, and it makes sense that they would be because they've been around the program, but not Jaden Mangum. Jaden Mangum, it sounds like he's still acclimating. To me, I thought that he would be the guy there. And then I could tell from the press conference that some other media people thought that maybe it was Wes Walker that had the inside track to that other starting job. Because there's questions about him and in light of his press conference on Friday or Thursday, whatever day that was, and being like, okay, well, what does he, does he look like Rod Moore? Does he like this? Does he like that? A couple of them. And LaMar Morgan kind of was like, well, you have to keep in mind, we'll read the actual quote here, because I think that's probably better. It says, I think for me to say that one of those guys would take that role, I think it was probably more on Makari's plate or Q's plate, just because they've been here longer. Asked about if he is going to, if he has that same skill set as Rod Moore. So I think that's interesting. Just to kind of get a little bit of, like, this is the time of year you get not just clarity, but you get maybe a little bit of surprises, because I don't think that anyone, even, obviously we knew Quentin Johnson by the spring game was coming back, but he couldn't practice with the team because he'd kind of withdrawn from classes and all of that. But he had been working out in Ann Arbor. He comes back. I just don't think that anyone looked at him as being like, yeah, it's going to be him. Right? You looked at it as it's Makari Page, and then Rod Moore goes down, and you're like, oh, well, who's it going to be? And it's like, well, it's going to be Brandon Hillman. Probably. And then they go get the 2 transfers, and it kind of upends things a little bit. But this kind of speaks to the quality of where the Michigan defense is. It's got so much going for it. And it does have the depth in that we're talking about, I thought that guy was going to be the starter. Turns out he's not, right? That's a big difference. Because when you're sitting there entertaining the idea that this guy's going to start, oh, maybe it's this guy. Oh, maybe it's this guy. Oh, maybe it's this guy. That tells you just how much depth that they have. And in the secondary, it feels like, all right, they're good to go. They're good to roll because they've got all this depth. But the good news here is, and this is the most important thing kind of coming out of the LaMar Morgan thing. This was a question on Wes Walker again. As Wes Walker had a slow adjustment period. Because again, it was like a surprise to some. Oh, he's not likely the starter. That's where some of us thought he was going to be. And because of that, LaMar Morgan was asked, as Wes Walker had a slow adjustment period. Here's what he had to say in the third of the 3 very long paragraphs. We've got 2 weeks, which I think is really exciting for us. And I think every day we can try to find ways to get better. So got an off day today, and tomorrow we'll get back at it and we'll try to move as many guys as we can. We want to be a positionless defense where guys can play multiple positions. Whether it's you can move a guy in on 3rd down, they don't know what he's doing. I think that's something where Coach Wink, he's been coaching for 20 years in the NFL and almost another 20 years in college. I think that's where his specialty is, finding roles for players. So that's the start of it. So then, obviously, like Angelique heard this, and she asked the very next question. During press conferences in fall camp now, it's all by raised hand. It's not like it always used to be where it was just a scrum and you just ask questions. So she was already on the list to ask the next question. And she's like, okay, I'm going to get to what I was going to ask. But first, I got to ask you, tell us more about this positionless defense. So this is what LaMar Morgan had to say. Like I told y'all when I first met a lot of y'all is the teacher background. So to me, when we start teaching concepts, we teach with X's on the board. It's not like it's a certain position. This is the corner. This is the safety. We try to teach the guys in different techniques. If you're a half-field player playing man in the slot, pressing the slot, whoever's at that spot, they just know that technique already. So now we can put a call in the corner is going to be the half call in that the corner is going to be a half-field player, which the safeties usually are. They know how to use those techniques. So I would say initially, I do think that could be a challenge for some of the players that have maybe not played a lot, just because they don't know it a lot. But I think our secret weapon here is our players that play so much. Like Rod Moore is meeting with guys. They've got questions. They go to me as a coach. I'm going to ask the guys in the meeting room how they see it. Do they see it the same way I see it? If I don't see it the same way they see it, why am I not? Where's the gap? I definitely transcribed that wrong. So I see that there's a lot of conversation, probably more than most meeting rooms, that I try to encourage because it is a lot when you're playing 2 or 3 different positions. So this is kind of where this all boils down to. Kind of my whole point on the depth piece is that you've got a defense that has a lot of different players that can do a lot of different things. Let's unpack that a little bit more here in just a moment. But before we do, you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we have a little something different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 to get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and then you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, so that was a lot of little things to kind of get to one place. I understand that. But when you look at the depth that Michigan has across the board, right? That's not just the secondary. I mean, we know who the starters are. So let's establish that. Well, I shouldn't say we know who the starters are. We think we know who the starters are. Let's establish that. Unpack it with the depth pieces, and then explain kind of how that works when it comes to the defense this season. So obviously up front, you've got the four that you know: Derek Moore, Josiah Stewart, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant. Behind them, Jay Sean Barham. I want to say Josiah Stewart again. Jay Sean Barham and Ernest Houseman. Of course, then as soon as that happens, my watch distracts me. And then nickel Zeke Berry, as LaMar Morgan pointed out, he and Jaden McBurrows are the two there. And then Makari Page, Quentin Johnson, Will Johnson, and it sounds like Jair Hill. Barring some kind of essentially catastrophic change, that's where you're at as far as the entire starting lineup of the defense. Now you've got all these other guys, a lot with starting experience. Jaden Mangum and Wes Walker, both former starters. Amir Hall, Ricky Johnson, both former starters. You go further down the line, you don't necessarily have as many former starters, but you got Jaden Hood, Jimmy Rolder, guys that Michigan would probably, obviously they would have a problem with rolling with them as starters. That's why they brought in Jay Sean Barham to some degree, but certainly could be starters at a lot of other places around the country without hesitation. Until they, if they prove themselves, then maybe it's a little different. Rayshawn Benny would be a starter pretty much anywhere. He's behind two of the best defensive tackles that there have been. Eno Etta, Trey Pierce, Ike Iwuna has apparently had a really good camp. TJ Guy is the guy that has been the biggest hype beast. And then outside of that, is it Dom Nichols? Is it Cam Brandt? I'm a little unsure when it comes to the edge rusher rotation, but generally that's kind of what they've got. So almost every position has a full complement of experienced guys or the next man up backing them up. I understand that some of the depth is inexperienced, but most of it isn't. And you're always going to have some inexperienced depth. That's always going to be the case, right? People will try to put that on you like that's a millstone, and it's never is. Every team is always going to have some inexperience. But with all of that in mind, it's not just that, okay, the starters are tired, we can roll them out, right? Like the way that this staff sees it and the way that LaMar Morgan has discussed it, it does kind of bring you back to the 2021 season when Mike Macdonald installed the defense. And then they learned an important lesson in East Lansing when, all right, well, we're just going to substitute because that's their personnel. Oh, well, they're going. Oh, we're not ready for this. And then that suddenly was like, well, we need a Mike Barrett out there. And then it took him even another year before he got to the point where you're like, well, I don't want to take him off the field. And then he came back for a 6th year and it was like, well, okay, now he's indispensable. But that was kind of a shift in the mentality for the Michigan defense, even with different leadership, 2 different defensive coordinators, no less. And now you're on your 3rd in Wink Martindale to say, we need guys who can do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So that is where they're at now. And in some of the things that LaMar Morgan said, and it's not anything that I read here, and I don't want to go searching for it, part of the idea is being able to say when it's when it's second down or it's third down, if it's a pass play or it's a run play, we want the versatility of being able to just move guys around in that, right? Positionless defense, it's kind of like you think of positionless basketball. And I know that you all know what that is, considering what the NBA has been. It's obviously you're not going to say, all right, Zeke Berry, you go in place of Kenneth Grant. Like, get to the quarterback in from the middle of the defense. That's probably not going to happen. But you would also not ask a guard to be a center either, necessarily. So what Michigan has here is a lot of really interesting chess pieces, because you've got guys who you would think of necessarily as depth pieces, but in a way they're just different chess pieces that have certain skill sets that you can sit there and say, this guy is good at this, this, and this. And this is the situation we're facing. You can start being in like planning to use guys in downs and distances. And I know you do that anyway, but it becomes even more of an integral part of like, all right, that, you know, we have them backed up. Now we need to continue to push them back, or we are backed up and we know that these guys are the ones that can do different things versus what we know this opponent is going to do on film. Now, none of this is groundbreaking, not anything that I'm saying here. So don't get me wrong here. But it's what's interesting here is now, instead of just having the idea of we have a versatile group of 11 that we can use at our disposal, and once those guys get tired, then we can rotate in the lesser guys. That's not necessarily what this is going to be. This is going to be a situation where it's going to be like, all right, this is the situation that we face, down in distance, personnel groupings, all of this. We can rotate in and feel really good about this. Now, obviously, there's still the learning curve with the transfers and all of that. So as long as they get over that and the inexperience continues to get experienced, all of this kind of indicates to me like this, if it's run correctly and there's not a lot of gaps or lapses. I mean, I understand this is fall camp. There's absolutely a capability of this defense being better than last year. Took me 17 minutes to get there, but that's what I'm trying to tell you. I understand this is fall camp. People are always going to say, well, what do you expect them to say? But the more we learn about things, right? Because it's not just about taking what someone says and then coming back and saying, oh, okay, well, they said it, so now I feel good. Or, you know, hey, everything's good, nothing's bad. Of course, every fall camp, that's going to be the case. It's about parsing everything and putting it together like a puzzle. Everything that you're hearing kind of fits together like a puzzle. Names that do get mentioned and don't get mentioned, all of that kind of also paints the puzzle. So when I look at just all the things that are being said about this defense, knowing what we know about the players that they have, definitely 3 likely first rounders, definitely likely, 3 first rounders on that side of the ball. A bunch of other guys that certainly can work their way up and into that. Because remember, every year there's always somebody. You know, no one was sitting there projecting like David Ojabo, who would have been a first rounder had he not suffered the injury on Pro Day. No one was projecting that David Ojabo was going to be like a high-end draft pick. Everyone at that point would have said, well, you know, David Ojabo, he's going to finally get to play a bit, and then the next year we'll see what will happen. No, there is no next year. I really like the personnel. I really like the versatility, and I like the ingenuity of this defense. But let's speak a little bit more specifically about the defensive front. Since we started with the back of the defense, let's move to the front. We're going to do that here in just a moment. But before we do, passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. I apologize if that's a little word salady the first 20 minutes there. Sometimes it's interesting because I sit down with these shows and it's like, okay, here's what I'm going to talk about. Everything's gone according to plan as far as what I want to talk about, the point I want to make. I just don't know that they correlated as well as I would have liked. Maybe it's because I'm recording early in the day where, there's a reason why we used to do these shows later, but now I'm trying to get acclimated to doing them earlier. And in a week, everything goes to plan. They'll be going even earlier than they were before. All right. So the last thing I wanted to talk about, I have a tweet pulled up from Jim Nagy. He's the director of the Senior Bowl down in Mobile, Alabama. He's a Michigan alum as well. So you're not going to get any Michigan hate from him. The ADD in me wants to clean the dust off my little screen here. He came and visited Ann Arbor and was absolutely thrilled to do so. And certainly that makes him have Michigan on the mind a little bit more, not as if they aren't. And I just noticed they're using a picture of Kenneth Grant that I took. That's nice. So he said this. This kind of backs up everything that I said. Michigan lost some key pieces off of last year's natty defense, but they returned plenty of high-end talent, particularly on D-line, which might be the best in college football. Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. See, no, it's all imploding now. Have been popular names in mock drafts this summer, but few know how good edge combo of Josiah Stewart and Derek Moore is. Loss of Senior Bowl alums Jalen Harrell with the Titans and Braden McGregor with the Jets, who have both looked really good in NFL preseason, would create huge roster voids for most programs. But Michigan football staff feels great about their next man up. Keep in mind, he was just in Ann Arbor, so he knows this directly. Based off of summer tape, we think that Stewart, 5.5 sacks last year, and Moore, 5 sacks, both have double-digit sack potential in their expanded rules this fall. Hashtag go blue, hashtag the draft starts in Mobile. All right. So I think he's doing a little bit more than being a fanboy. Certainly he is expositing for the staff to some degree. Let's go back to 2021. Because it's a pretty bold claim to say both could have double-digit sacks. In 2021, Aiden Hutchinson broke the record with 14 sacks. David Ojabo tied it, the single-season record, with 11. Obviously, tied the one that was broken. So to both have double-digit sacks, I'm on CFB stats. We're going to let's first go to last year. The sack leader last year was Jalen Harrell. He had 1 more sack than Josiah Stewart and 1.5 more than Derek Moore. There's not much concern about replacing them. It's not like, we lost Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo. What are we going to do? The number 2 and number 3 sack leaders are the 2 starters this year. Then you got Kenneth Grant with 3.5 at number 5, Mason Graham with 3 at number 7. Right? They've got a lot of guys that have had this capability. But to say that both will be double-digit sack leaders, 2021 is the last time that happened. And I'm just going to scrolling back here. This goes all the way back to 2009. The last time that anyone had double-digit sacks for Michigan was Taco Charlton, before 2021. Taco Charlton had 10 in 2016. Otherwise, just sitting here scrolling. Nope, it's like 5, all of that kind of stuff. Generally, Michigan gets about like anywhere between 4.5 and 8-ish from their sack leader in general. Now, here's the thing. I don't know that anyone would necessarily get there, let alone 2. Because you even look at last year. This is the list of everyone who had a sack for Michigan. Jalen Harrell, Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore, Braden McGregor, Kenneth Grant, Mike Barrett, Mason Graham, Chris Jenkins, Cam Good, TJ Guy, Mike Sainristil, Rayshawn Benny, Keon Sapp. That's everybody. That's 13 guys. Almost all of them were starters in some, I can see, I mean, a couple of them obviously were rotational, but generally it wasn't, it wasn't a ton of backups. But the fact that you see 5 edge rushers, 5 defensive linemen, 1 linebacker, only 1 linebacker on the list is kind of crazy as far as sacks last year, and 2 DBs. Like, the pressure is going to come from a lot of different places, and there's going to be a lot of different guys involved. Because of that, I feel like there's a chance that maybe they both aren't. But I'll remind you that in talking to someone a few months ago that was once close to the program, they said that both Josiah and Derek were better than Jalen and Braden, but they just needed to kind of be brought along a little bit more, and you let the older guys play, right? Because you're not going to take the older guys who are essentially as good. You're not going to take them off the field. But they said in their eyes, those guys, talent-wise, were better and certainly would be better. So that's just the edges. And then you have the interior, like, this might be the best Michigan interior of all time. I understand a lot of people point to 97. There's other years you can point to as well. But this is what I'm saying. It's on that level. And you already saw that last year. Again, let's look at the sacks. I mean, you've got Kenneth Grant with 3.5 sacks, Mason Graham with 3. I'm not even going to include Cam Good, Chris Jenkins, but no, yeah, because they're not here. Rayshon Benny with 1. So let's just use those 3 guys. That's 7.5 sacks from the interior. When was the last time Michigan had 7.5 sacks from the interior? Well, they had 5 total the year before. The year before that, they had 1.5. I'm going to skip 2020 because who cares? Well, they didn't have the differentiation in 2019 on here between edge and interior. Michael Dwumfor had half a sack in 2019. Looking at 2018, again, a really good year defensively. Brian Monet and Carlo Kemp combined for 1 sack. Michael Dwumfor got 3, so there's 4. Like, the sack production is there. So if they take any kind of step forward, it is going to be insanely scary for opposing teams. And it all starts that way, right? Because here's the thing. They've got players that can play on the back end. They got players who can play in the middle. There have been times that you've seen maybe that back 7 maybe being not as elite as the front, but it didn't really matter because the front was that elite. 2016 is probably a little bit of that. Like, not a lot, none of those linebackers, I mean, I guess Jabril, who's playing safety, none of those linebackers are in the league as linebackers. So with that in mind, this is pretty much a complete defense that can do just a little bit of everything. It's absolutely scary for opposing offenses, and that will give Michigan a chance in every single game this year. All right, that's going to do it for us today. We're playing a little bit by ear as far as topics throughout the week because we don't know exactly our press conference schedule. So if there is something, we'll address it. Otherwise, we'll just continue to do some season preview type stuff. So anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again soon. Peace.